The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening when Michael Chen pulled his rental Toyota into the parking lot of Rosa's diner. He sat there for a moment, watching the water streak down his windshield, and let out a long breath. For the first time in months, nobody knew where he was. No board meetings, no phone calls, no assistants telling him he was late for something important. His private jet was grounded at the small airport 20 miles away due to the storm. And honestly, he was grateful for the break. Michael stepped out into the rain, pulling his plain gray hoodie over his head. He looked nothing like the man who graced the covers of business magazines. No expensive suit, no designer watch, just regular jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to disappear was to look completely ordinary. The diner's neon sign flickered pink and blue against the dark sky. Through the foggy windows, he could see warm yellow light and the shadows of people moving around inside. It looked like the kind of place his grandmother used to take him when he was little. Before the money, before everything changed. A bell jingled as he pushed through the glass door, and the smell hit him immediately. Coffee, bacon grease, and something sweet baking in the back. The checkered linoleum floor was worn smooth in places, and the red vinyl booths had probably been there since the 70s. It was perfect. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," called a voice from behind the counter. "I'll be right with you." Michael chose a booth near the window and slid across the cracked vinyl seat. He pulled out his phone, then thought better of it and slipped it back into his pocket. When was the last time he'd just sat somewhere without checking emails or stock prices? "Sorry about the wait." The waitress appeared beside his table with a coffee pot in one hand and a menu in the other. She had kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen a long day. Her name tag read Maria in faded letters. "No problem at all," Michael said, offering her a genuine smile. "Coffee sounds great." She poured the steaming liquid into his cup, and he noticed her hands were steady despite the fact that she looked exhausted. "First time at Rosa's?" she asked, setting down the menu. "Yeah, just passing through. Flight got delayed because of the storm." Maria nodded knowingly. "Happens all the time with that little airport. You picked a good night to get stuck, though. We've got fresh apple pie that came out of the oven an hour ago." "You had me at apple pie," Michael said, and was surprised to hear himself laugh. When was the last time he'd laughed about something that simple? "Excellent choice," Maria said, scribbling on her pad. "Anything else? The meatloaf's pretty popular, or if you're not too hungry, we've got great soup." Michael glanced around the diner. It wasn't busy. Maybe 6 other customers scattered across the booths and counter stools. Everyone looked comfortable, like they belonged here. "What do you recommend?" "Well," Maria said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "the chef back there is my friend Carol, and she makes this chicken pot pie that's basically a hug in a bowl. But don't tell anyone I said that, she'll get a big head." "Your secret's safe with me," Michael said. "Chicken pot pie it is." As Maria walked away, Michael found himself watching the easy way she moved between tables. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, remembered how customers liked their eggs, and somehow made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. At the counter, she was chatting with an older man about his grandkids, asking specific questions that showed she actually remembered their names and ages. When she brought his food 20 minutes later, the plate was steaming and perfectly arranged. "Careful, it's hot," she warned, setting it down with a practiced hand that avoided the sizzling edges. "This looks incredible," Michael said, and he meant it. It wasn't fancy, but it was clearly made with care. "Carol will be thrilled to hear that," Maria said. "She's been perfecting that recipe for 15 years. As Michael took his first bite, Maria started to walk away, then hesitated. "Mind if I ask what you do for work?" "I like trying to guess, but you've got me stumped." Michael nearly choked on his pot pie. Usually people recognized him within minutes, even when he tried to dress down. "I'm in technology," he said, which was technically true. "Ah, that makes sense. You've got that thinking look about you. Like there's always something going on upstairs, you know?" "What about you?" Michael asked. "Been here long?" 3 years this month," Maria said, then glanced around to make sure her other tables were okay. "It's good work. Rosa, the owner, she's fair, and the people here are like family." "That's rare these days," Michael said. "Finding a place where you actually want to work?" Maria's expression grew a little wistful. "Yeah, well, sometimes you don't have much choice about where you work. But you can always choose how you do the work, you know?" Before Michael could ask what she meant, the bell jingled again, and a family with 2 small kids came in from the rain. Maria's face lit up like she'd been waiting for them all day. "The Rodriguez family," she called out. "Let me guess, little Sophia wants pancakes and Diego wants a grilled cheese with no crusts." The kids giggled and ran to hug Maria around the waist. Their parents looked tired but grateful as Maria led them to their favorite booth, already reaching for crayons and coloring sheets without being asked. Michael watched this interaction with growing fascination. In his world, everything was transactional. People were nice to him because he was wealthy, because he could do something for them. But Maria's kindness seemed completely genuine, offered freely to anyone who walked through that door. Over the next hour, as he slowly savored his meal and lingered over 3 cups of coffee, Michael observed Maria work her magic. She remembered that the businessman in the corner booth was diabetic and brought him sugar-free pie without being asked. She quietly slipped an extra roll to the construction worker, who looked like he'd worked through lunch. She wiped down the coloring table twice because the kids had made such a mess but never stopped smiling about it. "How's everything tasting?" she asked, stopping by his table during a quiet moment. "Best meal I've had in months," Michael said honestly. "You really love this place, don't you?" "I love the people," Maria said simply. "Everyone's got a story, you know. That man over there, he just became a grandfather for the first time. The woman by the window is celebrating 6 months sober. The kids with the crayons, their dad just got a promotion at the factory." You hear these things when you really listen. Michael felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time anyone had really listened to him? Not to his ideas about market strategy or technology trends, but to him as a person? "What's your story?" he asked quietly. Maria's smile flickered just for a second. "Oh, you know. Single mom, working a lot, trying to make ends meet. Same as a million other people." She glanced toward the kitchen. "But I've got dreams. Someday I want to open my own little restaurant. Nothing fancy, just a place where people feel welcome." "That's a beautiful dream," Michael said. "Dreams are free," Maria said with a shrug. "It's the rest of it that costs money." Before Michael could respond, the bell jingled again, and Maria was off to greet the new customers with the same warm energy she'd shown everyone else that night. As he watched her go, Michael realized something had changed in him during the past 2 hours. For the first time in years, he'd met someone who reminded him why he'd gotten into business in the first place. Not for the money or the power, but to make people's lives better. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, he would see exactly what kind of person Maria really was. Michael was just finishing his second cup of coffee when he heard Maria laugh from across the diner. She was wiping down the table where the Rodriguez family had been sitting, and little Sophia had apparently drawn her a picture of a rainbow. The sound of her genuine joy made him smile. In his world of corporate meetings and calculated conversations, hearing someone laugh like that felt like discovering something precious. He checked his watch. Almost 9:30. The storm was still going strong outside, rain drumming against the windows like tiny fingers. The diner had settled into a peaceful evening rhythm. The businessman had left, the construction worker was reading a newspaper at the counter, and an elderly couple was sharing a slice of chocolate cake in the corner booth. Maria came by with the coffee pot again. "Still nursing that coffee?" she teased gently. "At this rate, you'll be awake until tomorrow night." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Michael said. "This is the most relaxed I've felt in months." "Well, Rosa always says the diner works better than therapy," Maria said, pouring him a fresh cup. "Cheaper, too." As she turned to check on her other customers, the bell above the door chimed. Michael glanced up casually, expecting to see another late-night traveler seeking shelter from the storm. Instead, 2 young men in dark hoodies pushed through the door, moving fast and looking around the room in a way that made Michael's stomach tighten. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The taller of the 2 men reached into his jacket, and Michael saw the glint of metal. Time seemed to slow down as the man shouted something Michael couldn't quite process. The elderly woman in the corner booth screamed. The construction worker dropped his newspaper and dove behind the counter. The peaceful evening exploded into chaos, but not for Maria. While everyone else was scrambling, ducking under tables, and crying out in fear, Maria stood perfectly still behind the counter. Her face had gone pale, but her voice was steady as she addressed the 2 men. "Okay," she said calmly, her hands visible and empty. "Just tell me what you need and we'll make this as easy as possible for everyone." Michael found himself frozen in his booth, watching in amazement as Maria took control of the situation. One of the men was shouting demands, his voice shaky with nerves, but Maria listened carefully and nodded like she was taking an order for dinner. "The register's right here," she said, moving slowly toward the old cash machine. "I'm going to open it now." She pressed the keys deliberately, each movement calm and predictable. When the drawer popped open with a cheerful ding, she stepped back with her hands raised. But even as she followed their demands, Maria's eyes were moving around the diner, checking on everyone else. Michael watched her gaze stop on the elderly man in the corner, who was having trouble getting down from his booth. His legs weren't working right, and his wife was trying to help him while fighting back tears. "Excuse me," Maria said quietly to the men. "That gentleman over there needs help getting down. Can I help him? I won't do anything else, I promise." The shorter robber looked nervous, glancing between Maria and his partner. But something about her tone, so respectful and honest, seemed to cut through their panic. Just make it quick," he said. Maria moved across the diner like she was walking through water, slow and careful. She reached the elderly couple and gently took the man's arm, helping him slide down from the booth and onto the floor behind the table where it was safer. "You're doing great, Mr. Patterson," she whispered to him. Michael realized she knew these people by name. "Just stay down here with Mrs. Patterson until this is over, okay?" The old woman was shaking so hard she could barely speak, but Maria squeezed her hand and somehow that simple touch seemed to calm her down. From the kitchen came the sound of someone crying. It was high and scared like a child. Maria's head turned immediately toward the sound. "That's probably Carol's daughter," she said to the men, her voice still steady. "She's only 7. She gets scared easily. Can I go check on her? She won't come out if she's frightened." Michael couldn't believe what he was seeing. Here was Maria, in the middle of the most dangerous situation imaginable, and she was thinking about everyone else first. Not herself, not her own safety, but a scared little girl in the kitchen and an elderly couple who needed help. The taller robber was getting impatient, shifting from foot to foot and looking toward the door like he wanted to run. But his partner nodded at Maria. "Yeah, okay, but hurry up." Maria disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and Michael heard her voice, soft and soothing, talking to someone back there. When she came back out, she was carrying a small box of crayons and a coloring book. "She's okay now," Maria reported. "I gave her something to keep her busy." The whole robbery couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes, but to Michael it felt like hours. He watched Maria handle each moment with a grace he'd never seen before. She wasn't just surviving the situation, she was taking care of everyone around her. When the 2 men finally grabbed the money and rushed back out into the storm, the diner fell into stunned silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Maria was up again, checking on each person like a nurse making rounds. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, kneeling beside the elderly couple. "Mr. Patterson, how are you feeling?" "Mrs. Patterson, can I get you some water?" She moved to the construction worker next, who was still crouched behind the counter. "Hey, Danny, you're safe now." "It's over." Then she was checking the door to make sure it was locked, turning the sign to closed, and somehow managing to call the police while still keeping an eye on everyone in the diner. Michael sat in his booth, completely stunned. He'd seen natural leaders before, people who could take charge in a boardroom or handle a crisis in business. But what he'd just witnessed was something entirely different. Maria hadn't just managed a dangerous situation, she'd protected and comforted every single person around her, all while putting herself at risk. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, flooding the diner with flashing red and blue lights, Maria was still making sure everyone was okay. She brought blankets for the elderly couple, made fresh coffee for the construction worker who couldn't stop his hands from shaking, and even went back to check on Carol and her daughter in the kitchen. "Ma'am, we're going to need to talk to you," one of the officers said to Maria. "Of course," she replied. "But can I just make sure everyone here has what they need first? It's been a really scary night for all of them." Even with the police asking questions, even after everything that had just happened, Maria's first concern was still for other people. Michael watched her move through the diner one more time, touching shoulders, offering reassurance, making sure no one felt alone or forgotten. As she finally sat down to give her statement to the police, Maria caught Michael's eye across the diner. She gave him a small, tired smile, the same warm expression she'd worn when she'd brought him his coffee hours earlier, as if nothing had changed. as if she hadn't just shown more courage and compassion in 5 minutes than most people displayed in a lifetime. That's when Michael knew he'd witnessed something extraordinary. Not just bravery, but something much rarer. He'd seen someone choose kindness in the face of danger. Someone who protected others even when she could have just protected herself. And he knew, sitting there in that small-town diner with the police lights flashing outside, that he would never forget what he'd just seen. The next hour passed like a strange dream. Michael sat in his booth, nursing his now cold coffee, watching Maria navigate the aftermath of the robbery, with the same calm grace she'd shown during the crisis itself. Police officers filled the small diner, their radios crackling with static and official voices. Crime scene tape cordoned off the register area. Camera flashes lit up the room as photographers documented everything. Through it all, Maria moved like a gentle current, somehow managing to help the police while still taking care of everyone else who'd been there that night. "Officer Johnson, I can give you my statement whenever you're ready," she said to a young policeman who looked almost as shaken as the customers. "But first, can I get Mr. and Mrs. Patterson home? They live just 2 blocks away, and this has been really hard on them." Michael watched as Maria helped the elderly couple gather their things. Mrs. Patterson was still trembling, and her husband moved slowly, his earlier fear having settled into his bones. Maria wrapped Mrs. Patterson's sweater around her shoulders and made sure Mr. Patterson had his walking cane. "Danny, why don't you ride with them?" she suggested to the construction worker, who was standing by the window looking lost. "Your truck's still in the shop anyway, right? And I think they'd appreciate the company." It was such a simple thing, but Michael saw how her suggestion solved multiple problems at once. The elderly couple wouldn't have to be alone. Danny wouldn't have to walk home in the rain, and everyone would feel safer traveling together. It was the kind of natural problem solving that couldn't be taught in any business school. "Ma'am, we really do need to start your interview," Officer Johnson said apologetically. "Of course," Maria replied. "Let me just check on Carol and little Lily one more time." She disappeared into the kitchen again, and Michael could hear her voice, still warm and reassuring. When she came back, she was carrying a small pot of coffee. "Carol made fresh coffee for you all," she announced to the officers. "She figured you'd be here a while. And it's better than the station house coffee, I promise." The lead detective, a tired-looking woman named Detective Rodriguez, smiled for the first time that evening. "That's very thoughtful. We appreciate it." As Maria poured coffee for the officers, Michael noticed something that struck him as remarkable. She remembered how everyone liked their coffee. Officer Johnson got his black, Detective Rodriguez took cream and sugar, and the photographer got his with just a splash of milk. Even in the middle of giving a police statement about an armed robbery, she was still paying attention to the small details that made people feel cared for. When they finally sat down for her formal interview, Michael positioned himself where he could hear without being obvious about it. What struck him wasn't just what Maria said, but how she said it. She answered every question clearly and completely, but she never spoke about the robbers with anger or hatred. "They seemed young," she told Detective Rodriguez. "Scared, too." The shorter one kept looking at the door like he wanted to run. "I don't think this was something they'd planned very well. Did you feel threatened by them?" The detective asked. Maria considered this carefully. "I was definitely scared," she admitted. "But I felt more worried about everyone else. Mr. Patterson has a heart condition and Mrs. Patterson gets panic attacks. Little Lily in the kitchen has nightmares when she's frightened. I just kept thinking about how to keep everyone as calm as possible." Michael shook his head in amazement. Even during the police interview, Maria's focus was on other people's well-being rather than her own experience. "You showed remarkable composure," Detective Rodriguez noted. "Have you had training in crisis situations?" Maria laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. "I'm a single mom working 3 jobs. Every day is a crisis situation. You learn to stay calm and figure things out as you go." That comment hit Michael like a physical blow. Here was someone dealing with struggles he couldn't even imagine. And yet she'd just demonstrated leadership skills that would put most CEOs to shame. She hadn't learned crisis management in some expensive seminar. She'd developed it through real life, through caring for others when resources were tight and options were limited. As the interview continued, more details emerged about Maria's actions during the robbery. She'd not only helped the elderly couple and calmed the child in the kitchen, but she'd also quietly signaled to Danny to stay behind the counter where it was safer. She'd positioned herself between the robbers and the customers whenever possible. She'd even remembered to hit the silent alarm button while she was opening the register, something she mentioned so casually that the officers almost missed it. "You hit the alarm?" Detective Rodriguez asked, looking up from her notes. "Oh yes, as soon as I reached the register. Rosa showed us all where it was during my first week. I figured you'd want to know what was happening as quickly as possible." Michael realized that Maria had been thinking several steps ahead throughout the entire incident. She'd been managing the immediate situation while also making sure help was on the way. It was strategic thinking under pressure that rivaled anything he'd seen in the corporate world. The crime scene photographer approached their table. "Excuse me, miss, but we need to get some photos of the register area. Could you show us exactly how you opened it?" "Sure," Maria said, standing up. As she walked the photographer through her actions, Michael noticed that several of the officers had stopped what they were doing to listen. There was something about her presence that drew people in, made them want to hear what she had to say. "The key is to move slowly and keep your hands where everyone can see them," she explained to the photographer, who was young and probably new to this kind of scene, "and talk to them like they're people, not just criminals. Everyone's scared in a situation like that, even the people causing the trouble." Officer Johnson nodded thoughtfully. "That's really smart advice. I'll remember that." Michael checked his watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock and he could see that Maria was exhausted. She'd been working since early that morning, had just lived through a traumatic experience and was now helping the police with their investigation. But she still hadn't complained once or asked when she could go home. "Maria," Detective Rodriguez said, closing her notebook, "I think we have everything we need for tonight. Thank you for being so helpful. Most people aren't nearly this composed after something like this. Is there anything else I can do?" Maria asked. "Will you need me to come to the station tomorrow? We might have a few follow-up questions in a day or two, but nothing urgent. You should go home and get some rest." As the police began packing up their equipment, Maria started cleaning. Michael watched in disbelief as she wiped down tables, swept up broken glass from a water pitcher that had fallen during the chaos, and straightened chairs. The woman had just been through an armed robbery and she was tidying up. "Maria," Officer Johnson said gently, "you don't have to do that tonight. This can wait until tomorrow." "Oh, it's okay," she replied, continuing to sweep. "Rosa will want to open normal hours tomorrow and people shouldn't have to see reminders of what happened. Besides, staying busy helps me process things." That's when Michael knew he had to leave. Not because he was uncomfortable or scared, but because he was afraid he might do something impulsive. He wanted to walk over to Maria and tell her that what he'd witnessed was extraordinary. He wanted to ask her more about her dreams, about her struggles, about how someone developed the kind of character she'd just displayed. But he also knew that now wasn't the time. She'd been through enough for one night without a stranger asking personal questions, so he quietly left money on his table, far more than his bill required, and slipped out through the kitchen exit while Maria was talking to Detective Rodriguez. As he walked to his rental car through the dying storm, Michael felt like he was leaving a different person than the one who'd walked into Rosa's diner a few hours earlier. He'd come in looking for a simple meal and a quiet place to wait out the weather. Instead, he'd witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about leadership, about character, about what really mattered in life. Sitting in his car, watching the last police car pull away from the diner, Michael made a decision that would change both their lives forever. 3 days later, Michael was back in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chen Industries building in downtown San Francisco. The view was spectacular, as always. The bay stretched out beneath him, dotted with sailboats and cargo ships. The Golden Gate Bridge gleamed in the afternoon sun. It was the kind of view that normally made him feel proud of everything he'd built. But today, he couldn't stop staring at a small piece of paper on his desk. It was the receipt from Rosa's diner, crumpled and coffee-stained. He'd almost thrown it away 3 times, but something kept stopping him. Mr. Chen. His assistant knocked and stepped into the office. Janet had been with him for 8 years, and she knew his moods better than most people. "Your 4 o'clock canceled." Something about their flight being delayed. "Janet," Michael said suddenly, turning away from the window, "I need you to help me with something. But I need it kept completely confidential." Janet raised an eyebrow. In 8 years, she'd heard that phrase maybe twice, and both times it had led to something interesting. "Of course. What do you need?" Michael hesitated. How could he explain this without sounding crazy? That he'd met a waitress in Ohio who'd handled a robbery with more grace than most world leaders showed during press conferences? That he couldn't stop thinking about her calm voice and steady hands? I met someone during my trip, he said finally. A woman named Maria Santos. She works at a diner in Millbrook, Ohio. I'd like to know more about her background. Janet pulled out her tablet, fingers already moving. Any particular reason? Business opportunity? Something like that, Michael said, though he wasn't sure that was true. But Janet, this needs to be discreet. I don't want anyone contacting her or letting her know we're looking into her background. Can you handle that? Absolutely. What kind of information are you looking for? Michael thought about what he'd witnessed that night. Everything. Work history, family situation, community involvement. But remember, complete discretion. Got it. Give me a couple of days. But Michael couldn't wait a couple of days. That evening, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He was Googling someone. Not for business reasons, not for competitive intelligence, but because he genuinely wanted to understand who Maria Santos was. What he found surprised him. There wasn't much online about her personally, which was actually refreshing in an age where everyone seemed to document their entire lives on social media. But there were small mentions. A local newspaper article about a community fundraiser, where she'd volunteered to help families affected by a factory closure. A Facebook post from the Millbrook Food Bank, thanking her for her monthly donations of time and canned goods. The more he searched, the more intrigued he became. This wasn't someone seeking attention or recognition. These were just quiet mentions of someone who showed up when her community needed help. Janet's research came back 2 days later, and it painted a picture that both impressed and worried Michael. Sit down, Janet said, settling into the chair across from his desk with a thick folder. This is one of the most interesting background checks I've ever done. Tell me, Michael said, leaning forward. Maria Santos, 34 years old, divorced 3 years ago. She has 2 children, ages 8 and 11. She currently works 3 jobs. Janet flipped through her notes. Rosa's Diner, where you met her, where she works 30 hours a week. Millbrook Grocery, where she stocks shelves 20 hours a week, usually overnight shifts. And she cleans houses on weekends for a company called Helping Hands Home Services. Michael did quick math in his head. That's like 70 hours a week. At least, Janet confirmed. And here's the interesting part. Despite working all those hours, she's never missed a volunteer shift at the Millbrook Food Bank. Every Saturday morning for the past 2 years, she's there helping families get groceries. The director told my contact that Maria often pays for extras out of her own pocket when families need something that's not available through the food bank. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. What about her financial situation? Janet's expression grew more serious. She's struggling, but she's managing. Barely. Her ex-husband hasn't paid child support in 18 months. She's been saving money for culinary school, has about $3,000 put away, but she keeps having to dip into it for emergencies. Car repairs, medical bills for her son who has asthma, things like that. What kind of emergencies? Last month her daughter needed glasses. Maria used her school savings to pay for them. 2 months before that, her car needed new brakes. There went another chunk of the savings. Janet looked up from her notes. The pattern is pretty clear. Every time she gets close to having enough for school, something happens and she has to start over. Michael stood up and walked to the window, his hands behind his back. What about the diner? How's the business doing? That's actually the most concerning part, Janet said. Rosa's Diner is in trouble. The owner, Rosa Martinez, is 73 years old and her health isn't great. She's been trying to keep the place running, but costs keep going up and business has been slow. Word around town is that she's thinking about selling the building to a developer who wants to put in a chain restaurant. When? Soon. Maybe within the next few months. And if that happens, Maria loses her primary job, the one that gives her health insurance for her kids. Michael felt his jaw clench. The woman who'd shown such incredible character, who worked 3 jobs and still found time to volunteer, who'd risked her own safety to protect strangers during a robbery, was about to lose the job that kept her family afloat. There's more, Janet continued. I talked to some people in Millbrook. You know what they all said about her? That she's the kind of person who remembers everyone's birthday, who brings soup when someone's sick, who organized a collection to help the Patterson family after Mr. Patterson had his heart attack. The elderly couple from the diner, Michael murmured. He remembered them from that night. You know them? We met briefly. Michael turned back to Janet. What else? Her ex-husband left her with about $15,000 in debt. Credit cards he'd run up without telling her. She's been paying it down slowly, but it's been difficult with everything else. And get this, she's never declared bankruptcy, never missed a payment even when things got really tight. Janet closed the folder and looked at Michael directly. Boss, I've been doing background checks for years and I've never seen anything like this. This woman is working herself to death, dealing with financial stress that would break most people, and yet every single person I talked to described her as positive, generous, and kind. Her kids' teachers say she never misses a parent conference. Her coworkers say she covers shifts when people are sick. Her neighbors say she shovels their driveways in winter without being asked. Michael sank back into his chair. And now she's about to lose her main job. It looks that way, but there's something else you should know. Janet opened the folder again. I found out why she wants to go to culinary school so badly. Tell me. When she was a kid, her grandmother owned a small restaurant. Maria spent every summer there learning to cook, helping with customers. Her grandmother always told her that food was love, that feeding people well was one of the most important things you could do. The restaurant closed when her grandmother got sick, but Maria never forgot those lessons. Michael thought about the way Maria had moved through the diner that night, the care she'd taken with every customer, the genuine warmth in her voice when she'd talked about her dreams. She's not just working toward a career, Janet continued. She's working toward honoring her grandmother's memory. She wants to open a place where people feel welcome and cared for, just like her grandmother did. For a long moment, Michael sat in silence, staring out at the view he'd barely noticed all week. Finally, he turned back to Janet. I need you to do something else for me, he said. But this is even more confidential than the first request. Janet leaned forward, intrigued. I want you to quietly look into purchasing the building that houses Rosa's Diner. Don't approach the owner directly yet. Just find out who owns it, what they'd want for it, what the situation is. And Janet, yes? Start researching culinary schools. I want to know which ones have the best programs, what they cost, what kind of partnerships they have with the industry. Michael paused, a plan beginning to form in his mind. And look into what it would take to start a nonprofit scholarship fund for working parents who want to go back to school. Janet smiled. The first time he'd seen her look genuinely excited about a project in months. This is about the Waitress, isn't it? Michael nodded. 3 nights ago, I watched someone demonstrate more real leadership in 5 minutes than I see in most boardrooms in a year. She showed me something I'd forgotten about what business should really be about. Taking care of people. Building something that matters. He looked back out at the city below, but this time he wasn't seeing the view. He was seeing a small diner in Ohio, and a woman who'd chosen to protect others even when she was afraid. Janet, I think we're about to do something that's going to change some lives. Including yours? She asked quietly. Michael smiled. Especially mine. 6 months later, on a crisp Tuesday morning in March, Maria was running on 3 hours of sleep and her second cup of coffee. She'd worked until midnight at the grocery store, came home to help her son Antonio with a science project, and was back at Rosa's Diner by 6 in the morning. Rosa had been in the hospital again last week, and Maria was basically running the place herself now. The breakfast rush was just winding down when she noticed the unusual activity outside. A news van had pulled into the parking lot, followed by another one, then a third. Maria wiped her hands on her apron and looked through the window, confused. What do you think that's about? Asked Carol from behind the counter. She'd been the cook at Rosa's for 12 years and had never seen media trucks in their little town. Maybe there's been an accident somewhere, Maria said, though she felt a strange flutter in her stomach. Ever since the robbery 6 months ago, unexpected situations made her nervous. The bell jingled, and Maria turned to greet what she assumed would be another customer. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man in a simple gray sweater and jeans. It took her a moment to recognize him because he looked different somehow. More relaxed, maybe, but those were definitely the same kind eyes she remembered. Michael, she said, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing back here? Behind him, she could see camera crews setting up equipment outside. Her confusion deepened. Hello, Maria, Michael said with a smile that seemed to light up the entire diner. I was hoping we could talk. Is Rosa here? She's still in the hospital, Maria said automatically, then caught herself. I mean, she's getting better, but she's been there for a few days. Why? Is everything okay? Michael looked around the diner and Maria suddenly saw it through his eyes. The worn vinyl booths, the old cash register that stuck sometimes, the coffee pot that made strange noises. In the past 6 months, things had gotten worse. Rosa couldn't afford repairs anymore, and everyone knew the diner was living on borrowed time. Actually, Michael said gently, everything is about to be much better than okay. Could you sit down for a minute? Maria glanced around. The morning customers had finished eating, and Carol could handle things for a few minutes. She slid into the booth where Michael had sat that night 6 months ago, the night that had changed something inside her she couldn't quite name. Maria, Michael said, settling across from her. I need to tell you something that might sound a little crazy at first. Before she could respond, the door opened and several people with cameras and microphones began filing in. Maria's heart started racing. What's going on? She asked, starting to stand up. Please, Michael said softly. Just give me a chance to explain. A woman with perfectly styled hair and a bright red coat approached their table. Ms. Santos, I'm Jennifer Kim from Channel 7 News. We're here to cover a very special announcement. Maria looked from the reporter to Michael, completely bewildered. I don't understand. Michael reached across the table and gently took her hand. Maria, 6 months ago, you probably saved my life. Not just physically, but in ways you couldn't possibly know. That night, watching how you handled everything, how you took care of everyone around you even when you were scared, it reminded me why I got into business in the first place. Maria shook her head. I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone would do. No, Michael said firmly. That's where you're wrong. What you did was extraordinary, and I've spent the last 6 months learning about who you really are. How you work 3 jobs to support your kids. How you volunteer at the food bank every week. How you've been saving for culinary school for years, but keep using the money to help other people or handle emergencies. Maria felt her cheeks burning. How do you know all that? Because, Michael said, his voice growing stronger. I'm not just a guy who works in technology. I'm Michael Chen, and I run a company called Chen Industries. The name hit Maria like a physical blow. Even in small-town Ohio, everyone knew that name. Chen Industries was one of the biggest technology companies in the world. Michael Chen was one of the richest men in America. She started, then stopped, her mind reeling. I'm someone who was having dinner in a small diner when he witnessed the most genuine act of leadership he'd seen in 20 years. Michael continued. And I'm someone who believes that kind of character should be rewarded, not just admired. He stood up then, and Maria noticed that everyone in the diner had gone quiet. The camera crews were rolling, the reporter was holding her microphone, and even Carol had come out from behind the counter. Maria Santos, Michael said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I have an announcement to make. Maria felt like she was dreaming. This couldn't be real. As of this morning, Chen Industries has purchased this building and the entire block surrounding it. He paused, smiling at Maria's shocked expression. But we're not tearing anything down. Instead, we're creating something new, something that honors both your grandmother's legacy and your own incredible spirit. Maria's hands were shaking now. What are you talking about? We're turning this into the Maria Santos Culinary Institute, Michael announced. A tuition-free cooking school where working parents and people facing financial hardships can learn professional culinary skills. You'll be the head instructor. After completing your own culinary training at the best schools in the country, all expenses paid. The room erupted. Camera flashes went off, reporters started talking, and Carol let out a shriek of joy. But Maria just sat there staring at Michael, unable to process what she just heard. But that's not all. Michael continued, his voice rising above the commotion. We're also establishing a $10 million scholarship fund called the Second Chances Foundation. It will help working parents across the country pursue education and training in fields they're passionate about. Maria finally found her voice. Why? She whispered. Michael sat back down, and suddenly it was just the two of them again, despite all the cameras and noise around them. Because 6 months ago you showed me what real leadership looks like. Not the kind they teach in business schools, but the kind that comes from the heart. You protected people when you were scared. You put others first when you could have just protected yourself. You turned a terrifying situation into something manageable, because you cared more about everyone else's well-being than your own fear. Tears were streaming down Maria's face now. I can't accept this. It's too much. Maria, Michael said gently. You've been giving to everyone around you your whole life. Your kids, your customers, your community. Let someone give back to you for once. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't run a cooking school? Michael smiled. You've been running this place for months while Rosa's been sick. You've been taking care of your family while working 3 jobs. You've been helping your neighbors while barely making ends meet yourself. Trust me, you're more than good enough. The reporter stepped forward again. Ms. Santos, how do you feel about this incredible opportunity? Maria looked around the diner, at the faces of the people who'd become her second family. She thought about her grandmother, who'd taught her that food was love. She thought about her kids who'd watched her struggle and sacrifice for years. She thought about all the working parents out there who were fighting the same battles she'd been fighting. I feel like I'm dreaming, she said honestly. But if this is real, if this is really happening, then I want to make sure we help as many people as possible. Every person who comes through that door, every student who needs a second chance, every family that's struggling to make ends meet. That's what my grandmother would have wanted. Michael nodded. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. As the news crews continued filming and reporters asked their questions, Maria caught sight of herself in the diner's old mirror. She looked the same as she had that morning, but everything had changed. In a few minutes, her story would be shared around the world. People would hear about a waitress who'd shown kindness during a crisis and how that single act of character had transformed not just her life, but the lives of countless others who would benefit from the foundation. But right now, in this moment, all she could think about was her grandmother's voice telling her that feeding people well was one of the most important things you could do. Soon, she'd have the chance to feed people's dreams as well as their bodies. And it all started because she'd chosen to stay calm and take care of others during the scariest 5 minutes of her life. Sometimes, Maria realized, the most ordinary acts of kindness can lead to the most extraordinary changes. You just have to be brave enough to choose love over fear, even when everything around you is falling apart.